I have waited almost a decade for this. The 2024 total solar eclipse is finally upon us. And in this video, I'll take you along with me as I travel to Buffalo, New York to observe and photograph this incredible event. The last time a total solar eclipse came across the United States was in the summer of 2017. I was in high school at the time and I wasn't able to make it into the path of totality for that eclipse. So when I learned that I get another chance to experience a total solar eclipse just 7 years later, I put a reminder in my phone for early April of this year so I didn't forget about it. Little did I know at the time that a few years later I would begin this hobby of astrophotography, and that for the 2024 eclipse, not only would I be able to travel into the path of totality to observe it, but that I would also be able to photograph it and share it with other people. A few days ago, that reminder I put in my phone back in 2017 finally went off. So for me, this eclipse has been a really long time coming. The eclipse will begin when the moon first starts to cover the sun, and it'll end about 2 hours later when the sun is no longer obstructed by the moon at all. And if you're in the path of totality, like I will be in Buffalo, New York, then there will be a period of time in the middle of the eclipse when the sun is totally covered by the moon, and this is what's known as totality. Those few minutes of totality are the only time when it's safe to remove your solar eclipse glasses, and for me to remove the filter from my camera and telescope. And it's the only time during the eclipse when the sky will darken and the sun's corona, that's its outer atmosphere, will be fully revealed. If everything goes according to plan, it'll be an incredible visual experience, and hopefully I'll also have some unforgettable images to take home with me at the end. As excited as I am for this eclipse, I am also a bit nervous. From my location, totality lasts about 3.5 minutes. And after this eclipse, there won't be another total solar eclipse visible from the continental United States for 20 years. I only have a few minutes to take in the sights with my own eyes, and also at the same time to try to photograph totality. So it's really important that I make those minutes count. So here's what I'll be using to photograph the eclipse. On top of the tripod is my Star Adventurer GTI mount. This mount will help me track the motion of the sun and keep it centered in my camera frame. Now, for most of the eclipse, this mount actually isn't necessary. Back in October, I photographed the sun using this camera and telescope on a static tripod. And that's because the sun, even when it's partially obstructed by the moon, is incredibly bright, which means we have to take incredibly short exposures to capture it. And when you're taking exposures that short, you're not concerned with the motion of the stars, or in this case, the sun. It's during those precious few minutes of totality when this mount will really come in handy. That's because during totality, things are a bit different. Photographing the corona of the sun that'll be revealed during totality requires exposures that are a bit longer. That's where this mount is really important because it'll allow me to take those longer exposures. On top of my mount is the camera and telescope. The telescope I'm using is the Celestron Travel Scope 70. I've actually had this telescope since I was in elementary school, but it actually works really well for photographing this solar eclipse. It has 400 millimeters of focal length, which is really perfect for this situation. It's just zoomed in enough to reveal plenty of detail on the sun, but zoomed out enough to fully capture the sun's corona. The camera I'll be using is the Canon Rebel T3i. It's a DSLR camera, which really is perfect for photographing a solar eclipse. On top of the telescope is my solar filter, and it'll only be removed during those few minutes of totality when I'll be photographing the sun's corona. I really do think this is a pretty powerful solar eclipse photography setup. When I photograph something in the night sky, I use the North Star Polaris and the stars around it to precisely align the mount to the celestial North Pole. Polar alignment is super important because that's what ensures your mount is precisely aligned and is able to accurately track the motion of the sky and counter out the rotation of the Earth. Obviously, I won't be able to do that for this eclipse during the daytime. So I'll have to roughly align the mount north using the compass app on my phone. It won't be a perfect polar alignment, but it should be good enough. The exposures I'm taking, even during totality, will be pretty short. So a rough polar alignment should get the job done. Now, because the polar alignment won't be perfect, every now and then the sun will drift off center and I'll have to make some adjustments. I'll be able to manually keep the sun in the center of frame. It'll look something like this. I hope that gave you a better understanding of what exactly my plan is for this eclipse, and what you'll be seeing as you come along with me. The next time I'll see you will be the morning of the eclipse, where I'll give you an update on the weather, and it'll be time to head out for Buffalo. It is officially eclipse day, and the weather forecast is still a bit uncertain. There'll definitely be some clouds I have to deal with during the eclipse today. But, there's nothing I can do at this point other than cross my fingers and hope for the best. So now it's time to pack everything up in the car and get on the road to Buffalo. After getting everything set up, it's time to photograph this eclipse. Unfortunately, the cloud cover was thick. But take a look at that. Every now and then the eclipse would just shine through the clouds. It was enough for me to align my telescope with the sun and start photographing the eclipse. And I got to watch and photograph through breaks in the clouds as the moon began to cover more and more of the sun. As totality grew closer and closer, I began to notice the sky getting a little bit darker and the temperature starting to drop. Then, almost instantly, totality was upon us. The moon's shadow came sweeping over Buffalo at over 1,000 miles an hour. It became dark as night, and it was finally time to remove those solar eclipse glasses and remove the solar filter from my camera and telescope. And much to my disappointment, the eclipse was totally covered behind the clouds as totality started. I used those few minutes to look away from my camera screen and really take in the unbelievable visual experience. And then, in the final seconds of totality, there was a break in the clouds. It was just enough time for me to take this shot of totality. You can see the sun's corona just barely piercing through the clouds. And then, just as totality ended, I captured my favorite shot of the day. You're looking at something called Bailey's beads. The sunlight is interacting with the rough lunar terrain, mountains, valleys, craters, and peaks on the moon. It's allowing some but not all of the sunlight through, and that's what creates these beads of light. This is something that you can only photograph for a few seconds at the beginning and end of totality. A lot of people travel to see these total solar eclipses just to observe Bailey's beads. So to be able to capture this image of it right as totality ended, through the breaks in the clouds, was something super special. Then the 3.5 minutes of totality were over, and the sun began to re-emerge from behind the moon. The moon's shadow moved on up into New England and towards Canada. From my location, the eclipse that I had just witnessed played out in reverse, as the sun became less and less covered by the moon, until around 4 o'clock when the sun was no longer eclipsed at all. And the 2024 total solar eclipse from Buffalo was officially over. What an incredible experience that was. You saw just how thick the cloud cover was during the eclipse, and that really made things difficult. But my plan really did work out pretty well. The rough polar alignment I talked about at the beginning of the video was absolutely critical, because the eclipse would disappear behind the clouds for minutes at a time, and so I had to make sure I was ready for those brief breaks in the clouds, whenever they would happen. Having my mount tracking alongside the eclipse meant that When I would get a brief break in the clouds, I was ready to take advantage of it and take images. Given how much cloud cover there was, I was absolutely thrilled with how much I was able to photograph. By far my favorite shot of the day has to be the image of Bailey's beads. You only have a few seconds to capture Bailey's beads, so I can't believe I was able to get that shot. It's not easy to put into words what the experience of totality was like, but here are the main thoughts that I had. The first was understanding just how unbelievable it is that our moon is the perfect size to block out the sun. It's just big enough to obstruct it completely and to make it dark during totality, but small enough to allow the corona of the sun to be revealed. Then you think about the fact that this perfectly sized moon just so happens to be orbiting the planet Earth, the only one we know of that can support life. It really does make you feel small. It's one of those moments that makes you think about your place in the solar system. The other thought I had was how incredibly lucky I was to be able to experience this eclipse. We've only been able to predict when and where these eclipses will happen for a few hundred years. And if you think about it, on the incredibly long time span of human history, it was practically only a second ago that we started being able to predict these things. So, yes, I felt small, but at the same time, I felt big. Because you realize that those of us that are alive right now, we are the lucky ones. Because millions of us were able to travel into the path of totality to experience this incredible event. I'm curious to know, what was your solar eclipse experience like? Did you see a partial eclipse, or were you able to travel into the path of totality, like me? Leave a comment down below and let me know what you were able to see. And if you weren't able to see this solar eclipse at all, or you weren't able to travel into the path of totality, I hope I was able to share just a little bit of what it was like with you. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, clear skies.